How do you defend a nation that's just lost a myriad of soldiers and equipment in one fell swoop? That's the question the British government found itself asking in the early years of World War II, and the answer would arrive in the form of the venerable STEN submachine gun. Developed to help the British Armed Forces combat the unstoppable German advance across Europe, the STEN would prove to be an incredibly effective submachine gun design, becoming an iconic symbol of British defiance and the will to carry on in the face of potential annihilation. Simple, robust, and most importantly cheap, the so-called street-fighting machine carbine is the definitive British submachine gun of World War II, found in the hands of soldiers on all fronts, and becoming popular with resistance movements in German-occupied nations. With a weight of 7.1 pounds and a length of 30 inches, the STEN fires the pistol-grade 9x19mm parabellum cartridge out of 32-round box magazines. Dispensing its ammunition at a rate of 500 to 600 rounds per minute, the STEN is effective at around 100 meters, with rounds traveling upwards of 365 meters per second. The early years of World War II were nothing short of a disaster for those opposing German expansion across continental Europe. Since the mid-1930s, Hitler and his new regime had been slowly swallowing territory into their control, starting with the likes of Austria and Czechoslovakia, and finally prompting a military response from the horrified nations of Western Europe after their joint invasion of Poland with Soviet Russia in September of 1939. However, the Germans, spurred on by ideas of racial superiority and with a massive military might, continued to expand across Europe, facing feeble resistance from the British and French, who were becoming increasingly overwhelmed by the German blitzkrieg style of warfare, and by May of 1940, the remaining opposition to Germany's conquest were cornered at the French port of Dunkirk, resulting in a massive evacuation of over 300,000 soldiers, in what became known as the Miracle of Dunkirk. In the aftermath of this colossal defeat for the British and French, not only was Western Europe now fully under Hitler's control, but in their frantic rush to save as many men as they could, the British had abandoned nearly 2,500 artillery pieces, 85,000 vehicles, 75,000 tons of ammunition, 416,000 tons of supplies, 11,000 machine guns, and tens of thousands of other small arms. They had survived with their lives, but with little else, and with a German invasion of the British Isles looming on the horizon, the British desperately needed a new weapon to combat the incredible ferocity of the German war machine. The rapid German conquest of Europe and the disastrous campaigns the British had undertaken to attempt to halt it had made one thing abundantly clear: the British needed submachine guns. At this time, the British infantryman was equipped with the time-tested bolt-action Lee-Enfield rifle that had been in service in various forms since 1895, but against the MP-38s and MP-40s many Germans were equipped with, the bolt-action classic just wouldn't cut it. The British had attempted to procure as many M1928 Thompsons from the Americans as they could, but these were incredibly costly, and with German U-boats patrolling the seas to sink ships headed for Britain, actually getting their hands on the weapons was proving to be a challenge in itself. With no other alternative, the British began development on their own submachine gun, with the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield commissioned to produce a cheap submachine gun design for mass production. Weapons designers Major Reginald Shepherd and Harold Turpin began work on their new weapon in December of 1940, producing their first prototype, the T-40, less than 40 days later in January of 1941. Designed to be rapidly produced with little machining and utilizing unskilled labor, the new weapon was little more than a steel tube fitted with a barrel, bolt, magazine, recoil spring and trigger, operated with a simple blowback mechanism. Using cheap and easily acquirable materials, the parts for the weapon could be made with quick stamping and welding processes, the barrel and bolt being the only parts requiring any kind of complex machining, and as an added bonus, the weapon was designed to fire the readily available 9x19mm parabellum cartridge. In little more than a month, Shepherd and Turpin had created a weapon that cost $11 to make, compared to the $200 being spent on each Thompson they purchased from the Americans. In March of 1941, after performing well in testing, their hastily created weapon was adopted as the STEN Mark I, the name reportedly being a combination of the first letter of Shepard and Turpin's last names, along with the first two letters of the Enfield-based factory the weapon was built in. However, the Mark I proved too complex to be mass-produced, and just 2 months later, the STEN Mark II was introduced, ditching the wooden parts that adorned the original, and settling on a rather ugly design that could be produced in half the time of the Mark I. By the second half of 1941, the STEN was fighting on the front lines, where the weapon gained a mixed reputation, some praising the weapon for its ease of maintenance and effectiveness in combat, with others criticizing it for its tendency to jam and accidental discharges. British Sergeant Major Stanley Hollis would be awarded the Victoria Cross for his efforts in clearing a German pillbox at Gold Beach during the D-Day invasion using the STEN, undoubtedly saving the lives of hundreds of men, but for every story of the STEN's effectiveness was one highlighting its flaws, such as the story of Josef Gabčík, a Czechoslovakian commando who, when attempting to assassinate a high-ranking German SS leader, had his STEN jam, forcing his comrade to do the job with an anti-tank grenade. Wartime variants would do little to improve its operation and reliability, though a number were produced to fit different roles. In addition to the Mark I and Mark II variants, the STEN Mark III would be introduced in 1942, being made of fewer parts and being a lighter version of the weapon, though the barrel was not removable, meaning if the weapon sustained damage, it had to be scrapped entirely. The STEN Mark V would be produced towards the end of the war in 1944, adding a bayonet mount, a wooden pistol grip and stock, along with the front sight from the Lee Enfield No. 4 rifle. There also exist suppressed models of the Mark III and Mark V, known as the Mark III Special Purpose and Mark VI respectively, produced for special operations, also having specially ported barrels to lower the muzzle velocity to below the speed of sound. Other variants, such as the T-42 and Mark IV, were developed, but remained as prototypes and never saw full-scale production. In addition, a number of foreign-made STENs were produced throughout the war by resistance groups across Europe, the low cost and simplicity of the weapon being ideal for such underground organizations. Despite gaining unfavorable monikers such as the Plumber's Nightmare or Stench Gun, a well-maintained and properly functioning STEN was devastating when clearing rifle sections thanks to its low weight and high rate of fire compared to the bolt-action weapons it would frequently be put up against. When the STEN worked, which it did more often than not, it was a fearsome weapon, many accounts from the hundreds of thousands equipped with it during the war demonstrating that it was more than good enough to compete with the German MP-40. Due to its small size, ease of disassembly and slim profile, the weapon was ideal for use by resistance fighters across Europe, with many producing their own, along with the British airdropping thousands over the course of the war. Although it wouldn't last in service for too long with the British after the Allied victory in World War II, remaining until the early 1960s, the STEN would remain in service globally for decades, being one of the key firearms on both sides of the First Arab-Israeli War, finding use with American Special Forces in Vietnam, along with being used against the British themselves by IRA forces through the latter half of the 20th century, and reportedly seeing use in the ongoing Syrian civil war. It was by no means a perfect weapon in terms of its reliability, but for the cash-strapped Brits with their backs to the wall in the early years of World War II, it most certainly was the right weapon at the right time. It wasn't glamorous, nor very intricately designed, but it wasn't supposed to be. It was cheap, it was available, and it worked. And for a nation fighting virtually on its own against near impossible odds, it was the weapon they needed. A statement of defiance in the face of near defeat, the STEN is the iconic British World War II era submachine gun, and one of the most iconic weapons ever developed.
Thank you so very much for watching these videos. Please like and subscribe and comment below what you'd like to see me cover next.